So you want to own a medieval duchy? Picture this. You own more land than some small countries. You might have your own villages, your own fisheries, your own private stretch of coastline. And there's a real chance you can't pay your household staff by winter. That's the strange, uncomfortable truth sitting underneath owning a duchy estate. Vast on paper, and often one bad harvest away from disaster. Start with the scale of it, because the scale is the whole trick. A mid-sized duchy in 18th century Britain could stretch across 20,000 acres or more. Farmland, forest, quarries, entire tenant villages, all technically yours. Every farmer working that land owes you rent. Every mill grinding grain, every fishery pulling from your river pays you just to operate. On paper, you're running a small nation. So here's the question nobody quite asks out loud. If you own that much, why does the money never seem to actually be there when you need it? The small answer is that rent collection was slower and messier than the acreage numbers suggest. Tenants paid annually, sometimes twice a year, frequently late, and not always in cash. Grain, livestock, or labor owed instead of coin was common enough. A duchy generating, say, £12,000 a year in theoretical rents might only see 8 or 9,000 of that actually reach your account, and not all in one lump. Bad weather, a poor harvest, a tenant who simply couldn't pay that year. All of it chipped away at income you'd already mentally spent. But that's just the collection side. The bigger question is where the money goes once it does arrive. Here's where it gets interesting, because running an estate this size wasn't really farming. It was closer to running a small government. You employed stewards to manage the land, bailiffs to chase down rents, gamekeepers, gardeners, cooks, and a household staff that could easily run past 100 people once you counted both the country estate and the townhouse you kept in the city for the social season. Wages alone could swallow a third of your income before you'd spent a shilling on anything else. Then there's upkeep. A stately home with dozens of rooms and a roof the size of a village square is brutally expensive just to keep dry, let alone elegant. Add that up, and you're already down to a fraction of what the estate looked like it was worth. And then there's the part people tend to forget entirely. You were expected to spend, not save. Hosting the right guests, dressing the household in the right fashions, holding a seat in parliament if your title came with one. Looking wealthy wasn't a luxury, it was the actual job description. Some estates burned through 70 or 80% of their annual income just staying visibly important enough to remain politically relevant. Saving money quietly would have undercut the entire point of having a title in the first place. And every so often, the estate itself demanded reinvestment on top of all that. Land didn't stay productive by accident. Drainage systems needed digging, hedgerows and fences needed constant repair. New farming techniques that promised better yields required capital most estates didn't actually have sitting free. A duke who refused to spend on improving his land could watch a neighboring estate quietly overtake his in value within a generation, so even the frugal option wasn't really free. You were spending either way. The only choice was what you spent it on. Which brings us to the real twist, the one that surprises most people once they hear it. Owning a duchy was almost never really a farming business at all. The land itself was closer to incidental. What actually made or broke a ducal family was everything attached to the land, but not really about growing anything on it. Mineral rights buried under a wheat field, nobody thought twice about. A coal seam discovered decades after the deed was signed. Urban land absorbed by a growing city's edge and suddenly worth 10 times its farmland value, or a marriage that arrived with an enormous dowry attached. A single mining discovery under land that had produced modest rents for generations could out-earn a century of farming in a matter of years. And that still doesn't explain the deeper mystery. Because plenty of duchies were, by any modern standard, broke. Chronically, deeply in debt. Living in palaces while owing sums that would have ruined a merchant twice over. So here's the question worth sitting with. How does a family stay a duchy for 200 or 300 years while technically underwater the entire time? The answer is a quiet piece of legal engineering most people have never heard of, called entail. The core estate, the land itself, was locked by law so that no single heir, however reckless, could sell it off or break it apart. He could borrow heavily against future rents. He could mortgage decades of income before it ever arrived. What he could not do was sell the land out from under the next generation, and that changed everything about how lenders treated the family, because the land itself was never actually going anywhere. It would keep producing rent long after the current duke was gone, whoever happened to inherit the title next. It's a strange kind of stability once you actually picture it. A duke might die owing a sum equal to several years of his entire rental income, and the next heir would simply inherit the debt along with the title, the way you'd inherit a mortgage along with a house. Later on, death duties and inheritance taxes made this even harder to sustain, and it's a large part of why so many grand estates in the 20th century ended up selling off land, opening their houses to paying visitors, or handing the whole property to a trust just to keep the roof on. The system that had protected the land for centuries eventually became one of the reasons it started slipping away. Which is the bigger reveal, and the one that reframes the entire system once you see it. The land wasn't really an asset being managed for profit at all. It was collateral for an entire family's continued existence. An estate could be drowning in debt on paper and still count as one of the safest lending risks available, because everyone understood the one thing that could never happen. The land would never disappear. It couldn't be gambled away, sold in a panic, or split into nothing by squabbling heirs. That permanence, more than any single harvest or any single year's rents, was the actual asset, which is worth sitting with for a second longer because it's less foreign to your own life than it sounds. Anyone who has ever leveraged a house, a business, or even a strong reputation to secure a loan they could never have gotten on cash flow alone is running roughly the same play a duke was running 300 years ago. Banks don't lend against how much cash you happen to have sitting around. They lend against what you're unlikely to lose. Equity, not liquidity, is what actually opens the door. The Duchy just did it at a scale involving entire villages instead of a single mortgage on a family home. So no, you don't end up broke while owning more land than a small country by accident. You end up broke because cash was never really the point. The whole design was to hold something so permanent that everyone else kept betting on you regardless. The land itself was never really the wealth. The simple fact that it could never be taken away, that was.